He didn't see this coming. No one did. The dust had settled on everything Caleb Thorne once called his own. The foreclosure notice still crumpled in his weathered coat pocket served as a bitter reminder of how quickly a man's fortune could turn. 3 generations of Thornes had worked that land, built that ranch from nothing but grit and determination, and now it belonged to the bank. The cattle were gone, sold off piece by piece to pay mounting debts that seemed to multiply like locusts in a dry summer. His horse, his faithful companion through countless drives and lonely nights, had been the last to go, leaving Caleb with nothing but the clothes on his back and a heart heavy with failure. The small frontier town of Cedar Ridge appeared through the haze of heat and dust like a mirage, its weathered buildings casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. Caleb's boots kicked up small clouds with each weary step as he made his way down the main street, his shoulders bent under the weight of his circumstances. The townspeople he passed cast curious glances his way, some with sympathy, others with the wariness that came from seeing too many broken men drift through their community. He had heard there might be work here, perhaps in the mines, or helping with the railroad expansion, anything that would put food in his belly and a roof over his head until he could figure out what came next. It was outside the general store that he first saw the sign: Croft and Gable Boarding House, clean rooms, fair prices, respectable establishment. The painted wooden sign swayed gently in the evening breeze, and something about its simple honesty drew him toward the large, 2-story house that sat on a corner lot surrounded by a white picket fence that had seen better days. The house itself was well maintained despite showing signs of age, with lace curtains in the windows and flower boxes that spoke of feminine care and attention to detail. Caleb hesitated at the gate, suddenly aware of his dusty appearance and the few meager coins that represented his entire fortune. Pride warred with necessity as he considered his options, but the rumble of his empty stomach and the prospect of another night sleeping rough made the decision for him. He pushed open the gate and walked up the stone path to the front door, where a smaller sign declared, "Eliza Croft and Adeline Gable, proprietresses." The woman who answered his knock was perhaps 30 years old, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and intelligent hazel eyes that seemed to take his measure in a single glance. Her dress was simple but clean, the kind worn by women who worked hard for their living, and there was a wariness in her expression that spoke of too many encounters with men who brought trouble to her door. "Good evening," Caleb said, removing his worn hat and holding it respectfully against his chest. "I'm looking for a room if you have one available. I can pay," he added quickly, though the words felt hollow given the lightness of his pockets. The woman studied him for a long moment, her gaze taking in his weathered hands, the honest fatigue in his eyes, and the way he held himself despite his obvious hardship. "I'm Eliza Croft," she said finally. "Come in, Mr. Thorne, Caleb Thorne." She led him into a parlor that was modestly furnished but comfortable, with doilies on the chair arms and photographs of children on the mantelpiece. The smell of fresh bread drifted from what he assumed was the kitchen, making his stomach clench with hunger. Before he could sit, another woman appeared from the back of the house, this one perhaps a year or two younger than Eliza, with dark hair and blue eyes that held the same cautious intelligence as her partner's. "This is Adeline Gable," Eliza said by way of introduction. "We run this establishment together." Adeline nodded politely, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. Mr. Thorne is inquiring about a room, Eliza continued, and something passed between the two women, a silent communication born of long partnership and shared understanding. We might have something available, Adeline said carefully, though I should mention that our rates include meals, and we expect our guests to conduct themselves as gentlemen at all times. We have children in the house. As if summoned by her words, the sound of young voices drifted from upstairs, followed by the quick patter of small feet on wooden floors. Caleb found himself smiling despite his circumstances, the sound of children's laughter stirring something in him that had been dormant since his own childhood dreams of family had been buried under years of solitary ranch work. "I understand completely," he assured them. "I'm not looking for trouble, just a place to rest while I get back on my feet." The two women exchanged another look, and Eliza gestured for him to sit. "Would you care for some coffee, Mr. Thorne? You look like you've traveled far." The kindness in her voice nearly undid him. It had been months since anyone had shown him genuine consideration, and he had to clear his throat before answering. "That would be much appreciated, ma'am." As Adeline disappeared to fetch the coffee, Eliza settled into the chair across from him. "Might I ask what brings you to Cedar Ridge? We don't see many ranchers this far north." Caleb's hand instinctively moved to the foreclosure notice in his pocket. "Lost my spread," he said simply. "Bank called in the loans after a run of bad luck with the cattle and some harsh winters. 3 generations of my family worked that land and I couldn't hold on to it." There was no judgment in Eliza's expression, only understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss. A man's land is more than property, isn't it?" "Yes, ma'am, it is." He appreciated that she understood, that she didn't offer empty platitudes about new opportunities or suggest that material losses didn't matter. Adeline returned with coffee and a plate of fresh biscuits that made Caleb's resolve to maintain his dignity waver dangerously. The women sat across from him, and he sensed they were weighing something more significant than his ability to pay for a room. "Mr. Thorne," Eliza began, her voice careful and measured, "Adeline and I find ourselves in a situation that requires a certain creative solution. We've been operating this boarding house for 3 years now, ever since we both found ourselves widowed and in need of supporting our children. The town has been good to us for the most part," Adeline added. "Our guests are respectful, we pay our taxes, and we contribute to the community. But there are some who believe that 2 women running a business without male oversight is inappropriate." Caleb set down his coffee cup, beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. "What kind of pressure are you facing?" "The town council has been making noise about our business license," Eliza explained. "They claim that a boarding house run by unmarried women is a threat to public morality, that it attracts the wrong sort of clientele. It's nonsense, of course, but they have the power to shut us down if they choose. We've tried reasoning with them," Adeline continued, her frustration evident despite her controlled tone. "We've shown them our books, our letters of reference from previous guests, testimonials from townspeople who support us. But Mayor Hutchinson and Sheriff Wade seem determined to find fault with our operation." Caleb leaned back in his chair, processing what they were telling him. "What does this have to do with me?" The two women looked at each other again, and Eliza took a deep breath. "We've been considering a proposal that might solve both our problems. You need a place to stay and a fresh start. We need a man who can serve as the head of our household, someone who can give our business the respectability the town council seems to require." We're not talking about anything improper. Adeline added quickly, color rising in her cheeks. It would be a business arrangement, pure and simple. You would have your own room, take your meals with the family, and help us with the heavier work around the house. In exchange, you would present yourself as the man of the house when dealing with officials or anyone who questions our right to operate. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, considering the proposition. It was certainly not what he had expected when he knocked on their door, but there was a practical wisdom to it that appealed to him. These women had built something worthwhile, and if his presence could help them keep it, perhaps that was purpose enough for now. "What about your children?" he asked. "How would they feel about a stranger taking on such a role?" "We would introduce you gradually," Eliza said. "Let them get to know you as Mr. Thorne who helps around the house. If you're willing, we think they would benefit from having a stable male figure in their lives. It's been hard on them, losing their fathers so young." "My Samuel is 8, Adeline offered. "He's a good boy, but he's been getting into scrapes at school trying to prove himself, I think. And my little Emma just turned 6. She's shy around men she doesn't know, but she warms up quickly to those who are kind to her." "I have 2 as well," Eliza added. "Rebecca is 10, very responsible and mature for her age. She helps me with the younger ones and the housework. And Thomas is 7, full of energy and questions about everything under the sun." The sound of children's voices grew closer, and soon 4 young faces peered around the doorway, curious about the stranger in their parlor. Caleb found himself studying each child, seeing in their eyes the same wariness their mothers had shown, but also a hunger for the security and stability that a father figure might provide. "Children, come and say hello to Mr. Thorne," Eliza called gently. "He's considering staying with us for a while." The introductions were formal but friendly, with each child offering a polite greeting before retreating to hover near their mothers. Caleb could see the questions in their eyes, the hope they were trying not to show too openly, and something in his chest tightened with unexpected emotion. "It's a generous offer," he said finally, addressing the women but speaking loudly enough for the children to hear. "I'd be honored to help your family in whatever way I can." The relief on both women's faces was immediate and profound, and Caleb realized just how much pressure they had been under, how difficult it must have been to maintain their independence while facing constant challenges to their right to do so. "There's one more thing," Adeline said quietly. "The mayor and sheriff have scheduled an inspection of the premises for next week. They're looking for any excuse to shut us down, and we're afraid that having only women present will give them the ammunition they need. They'll be expecting to speak to the man of the house," Eliza added, "someone who can answer their questions and assert our right to continue operating." Caleb nodded slowly, understanding the full weight of what they were asking. "I'll be here," he said simply. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Caleb settled into his new role. The room they gave him was clean and comfortable, with a window that looked out over the small garden where the children played. His meals were shared with the family around a large kitchen table that became the heart of their daily life, where homework was completed, plans were made, and the easy chatter of domestic life filled the spaces between more serious conversations. The children were initially cautious around him, but Caleb's patient manner and genuine interest in their activities gradually won them over. He helped Thomas with his arithmetic, listened to Rebecca read aloud from her school books, played simple games with little Emma, and shared stories of ranch life with Samuel, who hung on every word about cattle drives and wild horses. With the women, he found a partnership that felt natural despite its unconventional nature. Eliza proved to be a shrewd businesswoman with a keen understanding of their guests' needs and the delicate balance required to maintain their reputation in the community. Adeline was the more domestic of the two, with a talent for creating the kind of comfortable, welcoming atmosphere that made travelers want to return. Caleb took on the repairs and maintenance that had been beyond their capability, fixing loose boards on the front porch, reinforcing the fence around the garden, and addressing a dozen small problems that had been accumulating over months of trying to manage everything themselves. The physical work was satisfying in a way that surprised him. Each completed task a small victory in rebuilding not just the boarding house but his own sense of purpose and worth. The day of the inspection arrived with unseasonable heat and a tension that seemed to permeate the entire house. The children had been sent to school early, and the current boarders had been politely encouraged to make themselves scarce for the morning. Eliza and Adeline moved through their preparations with nervous efficiency, checking and rechecking that every room was spotless, every piece of paperwork in order. Caleb dressed carefully that morning, choosing his best shirt and taking extra care with his appearance. He understood that he was not just representing himself, but the entire family they had built together, fragile and new as it was. When the sound of heavy footsteps on the front porch announced the arrival of their visitors, he was ready. Mayor Hutchinson was a portly man in his 50s with a carefully waxed mustache and the kind of self-importance that came from small-town political power. Sheriff Wade was younger but carried himself with the swagger of a man who enjoyed the authority his badge provided. Both men entered the house with the air of officials conducting a distasteful but necessary duty. "Mrs. Croft, Mrs. Gable," the mayor said with perfunctory politeness, "we're here for the inspection we discussed. I trust you have all your documentation in order." "Of course, Mayor Hutchinson," Eliza replied smoothly. "Though I should introduce you to my husband, Caleb Thorne. He's recently taken charge of our business affairs." The mayor's eyebrows rose in surprise, and Sheriff Wade's hand moved instinctively toward his gun belt in a gesture that was probably unconscious but nonetheless telling. "Husband," Hutchinson repeated. "I wasn't aware that either of you ladies had remarried." Caleb stepped forward, extending his hand with calm confidence. "Pleased to meet you, gentlemen. I apologize for any confusion. Eliza and I were married quietly last month, and I've been getting acquainted with the business and the community." The handshake was firm, and Caleb met each man's gaze steadily, projecting the kind of quiet authority he had learned during years of managing ranch hands and dealing with difficult cattle buyers. "I understand you have some concerns about the operation of our establishment." "Well, yes," the mayor stammered slightly, clearly thrown off balance by this unexpected development. "We've had reports of irregularities, complaints about noise, suggestions that the house might not be suitable for respectable travelers." "I'd be happy to address any specific concerns," Caleb replied evenly. "As you can see, we maintain high standards of cleanliness and decorum. Our guests are carefully screened, and we have strict policies about behavior on the premises." Sheriff Wade had been examining the parlor with obvious suspicion, as if expecting to find evidence of some unnamed vice hidden behind the lace curtains and family photographs. "What exactly is your background, Mr. Thorne? How do we know you're capable of managing this kind of establishment? I owned and operated a cattle ranch for 15 years before coming to Cedar Ridge, Caleb answered truthfully. I understand the importance of maintaining order and discipline, whether dealing with livestock or people. I also understand the value of treating customers with respect and providing them with honest service. The inspection proceeded through the house, with the mayor and sheriff examining each room with decreasing enthusiasm as they found nothing to criticize. The bedrooms were clean and properly furnished. The common areas were welcoming without being overly luxurious, and the kitchen met all standards for food preparation and storage. Your records seem to be in order, Herr Hutchinson admitted grudgingly as they concluded their tour in the front parlor. Though I hope you understand, Mr. Thorne, that we'll be keeping a close eye on this establishment. Cedar Ridge has a reputation to maintain. Of course, Caleb replied. I wouldn't expect anything less. A good reputation benefits everyone in the community. As the officials prepared to leave, Sheriff Wade turned back with what seemed like a final attempt to find fault. One more thing, Thorne. We'll need to see your marriage certificate for our records, just to ensure everything is properly documented. Caleb felt Eliza tense beside him, but his expression never wavered. Naturally. I'll have my wife bring the documentation to your office tomorrow morning. Will that be satisfactory? The sheriff nodded curtly, and both men took their leave with considerably less bluster than they had arrived with. As soon as the front door closed behind them, Caleb sank into the nearest chair, suddenly aware of how tightly wound he had been throughout the encounter. That was masterfully done, Adeline said, her voice filled with admiration and relief. You completely threw them off their game. The marriage certificate, Eliza said quietly. We don't have one, obviously. Caleb looked up at her, seeing the worry in her eyes despite their victory. No, but we could, if you're willing. It would make this arrangement legal and permanent, give us the strongest possible position against any future challenges. The suggestion hung in the air between them, more significant than anything they had discussed before. What had begun as a practical arrangement was evolving into something deeper, a real commitment to the family they were building together. It would change everything, Adeline pointed out softly. Make it real instead of just an act for the townspeople. Maybe it already is real, Caleb said, surprised by his own words but recognizing the truth in them. These past weeks, living here, becoming part of your family, it's felt more like home than anywhere I've been in years. Eliza was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. The children have already started calling you Papa Caleb when they think we're not listening. The words hit him harder than he expected, and Caleb felt something shift inside his chest. A wall he hadn't even realized he was carrying finally beginning to crumble. These people had given him more than just shelter and purpose. They had given him a reason to hope again, to believe that a man could lose everything and still find his way to something better. Then maybe we should make it official, he said, looking at each of the women in turn. All of us. A real family, legal and binding for better or worse. The conversation that followed stretched long into the evening, covering practical matters like property rights and financial arrangements, but also deeper questions about love and commitment and the kind of family they wanted to build together. When the children returned from school, they found their parents, for that's what they were becoming, seated around the kitchen table with serious expressions and hopeful eyes. We have something to tell you, Eliza began, And as she explained the events of the day and their decision to make their arrangement permanent, Caleb watched 4 young faces transform from confusion to understanding to joy. "Does this mean Mr. Caleb is really our papa now?" Emma asked, her small hand reaching out to touch his arm as if to make sure he was real. "If you want me to be," Caleb answered, his voice rough with emotion he was no longer trying to hide. The chorus of affirmation that followed sealed his fate and his future. Whatever he had lost when the bank took his ranch, whatever dreams had died with his old life, he had found something here that was worth more than any amount of land or cattle. He had found a family that chose him just as he was choosing them, broken pieces fitting together to create something stronger and more beautiful than any of them could have built alone. The small frontier town of Cedar Ridge had given him more than just a place to rest. It had given him a second chance at the life he had always wanted, but never dared to hope for. And as the evening settled around the boarding house that was now truly home, Caleb Thorne knew that some kinds of wealth could never be foreclosed upon, could never be taken away by banks or broken by bad weather. Some treasures grew stronger with time and commitment, and he was finally rich beyond measure.